The King of Saudi Arabia calling on America to attack Iran to cut off the head of the snake. US officials being asked to spy on UN leaders, and a British royal accused of inappropriate behaviour. Headlines this morning around the world are filled with these stories and more, as details from 250,000 diplomatic cables filed to and from American embassies are published by WikiLeaks. Well, I'm joined by James Blitz, our diplomatic editor. And James, most of this seems to be embarrassing, but what are the more serious aspects to all of this?
Well, when you're offered a buffet on this scale, inevitably it's up to you to choose which particular bit you want to have. I mean, the thing for me that comes out on this first day, and you have to remember this is one of a series of days when this stuff is going to appear, is what it's telling us about the state of proliferation of nuclear weapons and conventional arms in the world. I mean, you've got two quite important stories that have come out. One of them is that North Korea has been supplying Iran with rockets which are much more capable than the ones we thought they have, able to hit Moscow or even Berlin. You've got a story about how US diplomats are concerned about highly enriched uranium, weapons-grade uranium, which is inside a Pakistan reactor, which they urgently want to get out of the country in case there's a serious political problem in Pakistan, and that gets into the hands of terrorists. That's the kind of thing.
It's a real
which is
escalation. And if we cast our minds back a week ago, and we were learning about the state of the nuclear facilities in North Korea being far more sophisticated than we realised, then it really is quite worrying.
Yeah, I think the year is ending on a very strong worrying note about the extent to which these illegal networks diversifying nuclear goods, conventional arms, North Korea, the links between North Korea and Iran, that is, I think, a very worrying thing. And I think that these WikiLeaks documents have underscored the concern there is about that.
What about King Abdullah and his comments about Mahmoud Ahmadinejad wanting to cut off the head of the snake? A vehemence that we've never really seen before. This is very undiplomatic language.
Yes, there's no question this will be very embarrassing for the Saudi government and also for governments in the Gulf, which very rarely say anything in public about anything in terms of what they're internally thinking. But we've known all along that the Saudis and the Gulf states are really worried about Iran. We've known that one of the really big risks if Iran gets a nuclear weapon is that these states will also feel that they want to get nuclear capabilities as well. What I think we've found here is the level of concern, the vehemence there is about Iran's nuclear program. I have to say, I think that revelation will be very helpful to the US and to Israel as it's getting countries around the world to face down Iran, because the Americans and the Israelis will be able to say, look, it's not just us who are worried, the region is worried about it.
So that really is interesting. This is a revelation. It was unplanned. These are leaks. But the very fact that they are so open and so candid could help America. This is things they could never choose to say, but now it's been said. It's out there and it's useful to them.
Yes, I'm not suggesting that the US, the State Department, wanted this stuff out. Of course it doesn't. It's immensely embarrassing, but it cuts both ways. Some of this stuff is embarrassing to the US, there's no question. The way in which, for example, the US diplomats have been given directives to pass on information about officials at the UN, for instance, which looks like a form of spying, that kind of thing is worrying. I mean, but this is quite helpful.
We learn that, we understand that Hillary Clinton has been phoning around various leaders across the world, trying to pacify them in some way. What could she possibly say that would help smooth these tempers?
Well, in the case of the UN, not a great deal. I mean, this is embarrassing for the US that it's basically asked its diplomats not to go out and start stealing documents at the UN or do active espionage, that kind of thing, but to pass on the kind of information back to the State Department, and then possibly that would then go pass on to the NSA, which is basically information about people's credit cards, their travel plans, and so on, which allows US intelligence agencies to build up a bigger picture about officials in other countries or at the United Nations. I mean, it's at one stage below spying, but it's nonetheless embarrassing for the US.
It sounds a little bit sordid. Now, at a broader level, what are we learning? Is there some insight that we can glean from stories that perhaps we already knew about, but just the take that the American diplomats are putting on developments?
There's a range of stories. We've known for a long time, for instance, that the US is very worried about the relationship between Silvio Berlusconi and Vladimir Putin, for instance, that they regard the Italian leader as being somebody who works very, very closely with the Russians because there are strong business interests. It's interesting to see a telegram which spells out that, that he is very much the best mouthpiece in Europe for the Russian leadership. We've known that the relationship between President Medvedev in Russia and Vladimir Putin as Prime Minister is a complicated one in which Putin is very much the leading figure, if you like. It's interesting to see a telegram which describes Medvedev as playing Robin to Vladimir Putin's Batman. That's the kind of thing which is interesting. It's not, I don't think there's much which is telling us giving us a radically new take or an important new piece of information on how the US views the world, but it does give an awful lot of colour and a lot of granularity to the way in which the US does its diplomatic relations.
Marvel Comics view. James Blitz, thank you very much indeed. And you can read much more analysis about these WikiLeaks revelations on ft.com. Goodbye.